Oh man. Pangolin Love is a Google Doodle game made in 2017 about a pink pangolin looking to meet up with their purple pangolin lover and be gay together and kiss. However, there are two issues with this. Not only are we in July, which is pretty far away from Valentine's, but we also have to make sure this isn't a pangolin catfisher, which is why today, we're going to downscale our pangolin friends' extreme ambitions for today into a much more modest coffee date. Can you beat the Pangolin Love Minimalist Challenge? The rules are incredibly simple. At the top of the screen is a tally showing the number of collectibles we've gotten in our level. We're going to do everything in our power to keep that number as low as possible throughout each of the 4 levels of the game. With the rules out of the way, let's get this run started. In the first level, we head to Ghana to make a cake. The controls of this game, being a Google Doodle, are very simple. And by that, I mean there's 3 buttons, and 3 buttons only. And that means that our movement options are pretty limited. Along with that, there is a constant timer in the levels, so we can't stay struggling on a big issue forever, but I'll be real with you, I don't think that was ever an issue in my run. We're able to easily jump over the first couple of cocoa pods before we hit our first major roadblock. A thin tunnel with 5 cocoa pods in it. We can't jump over the wall, as jumping on a vertical wall like this just shoots us sideways, and even if it didn't, the wall is too high to scale anyways. And with no other options for movement or wiggling through the tunnel without getting them, we're forced to bite the bullet and pick up our first 5 collectibles. After a couple more spread out clusters, there's a couple groups of cocoa pods that are pretty close together. You wouldn't think this is an issue, but all surfaces in Pangolin Love have a kind of ice effect, and when landing from a jump especially, your momentum will carry onwards in the direction you landed, even if you're holding the opposite direction the entire time. And that makes these smaller spots really difficult to manage. Now, theoretically, you could do a God Gamer jump holding right just the perfect amount to squeeze in between and immediately jump out, but I found a much better method. This is a movement tactic I call jump canceling. For some reason, even though trying to move in a direction to stop momentum doesn't work, jumping can change momentum on a dime if you jump holding the direction opposite to how you landed. So in tight spots, you land where you need to, immediately jump left to stop moving to the right, then stop moving so that you fall straight downwards and don't roll anywhere upon your second landing. After a couple jump cancels and more openness as we drop down the waterfall and under the jungle, we face another roadblock. But for better or worse, this one isn't nearly as clear-cut as the first. Here we have 5 cocoa pods lined up into a jump with another 5 and saw blades below. Saws and other spiky objects are awful for this run. They're almost always placed near collectibles, and if you touch them, not only are you sent backwards, but your controls are completely locked for a couple of seconds, so you can't even manipulate where you go with them. The only spot in between the pods to jump through sends us face first into the saws, so that isn't an option. However, as displayed through jump canceling, your mobility in the air is actually pretty good. So landing just on the edge to pick up 1 cocoa pod and then jumping means we can dodge the first 4 and then dodge another 2 in the air. The other 3 are at the peak of our jump height, and I couldn't find a way to dodge them without missing and hitting the saws. So we pick up the 4 and leave with a total of 9 in the first level. For our second level of the game, we go to India to gain musical knowledge, and this level introduces water. I don't like water levels in games, most people don't, and this is no exception. The controls in water are very finicky, and you get to see immediately how that's the case when the level starts. You can jump over the first cluster of musical notes, but the third one gives us some issue. Not only are 2 of them above water level, but there's also a waterfall that pushes us down right next to them. You'd think that this means the 2 are required, but the game actually tells us a different story. Leaving the water gives you the same mobility in the air as if you had jumped from the ground. And it definitely looks like the water level is inconsistent, at least with the hitboxes when your character is jumping. I believe that, for whatever reason, there's a brief moment where the game thinks you're out of water despite still being able to touch it and jump again. It's definitely awkward and I don't know how to properly time it consistently, but if you get it right, then you can jump super high out of the water. Just high enough, in fact, to barely clear over the 2 notes entirely. We swim up and around a couple more clusters of music notes before we find another roadblock like our very first one, but like a quirky nice girl version, and that comes in the form of arrow pipes. Thin tunnels with no way to maneuver around them, and to add salt to the wound, arrows that force us in a direction that we can't fight against. Luckily, by going over, we can avoid the first one, but the other 3 are forced upon us, and shortly after is a trio of similar arrow pipes. Given the fact that I literally just said the arrow pipes give you momentum and that you can't really fight against it, you'd assume that 3 arrows at minimum are definitely required, 1 for each pipe. But once again, water physics are quirked up and freaky, just like my friends. By spamming jump underwater, you can actually gain a lot of upwards momentum very quickly, even if it's not as much height overall as a regular set of slower jumps. However, it is still enough to dodge the first 2 arrow pipe attacks, but the third one, unfortunately, isn't as kind. Holding left does nothing against the momentum of the pipe, holding down does literally nothing, and despite my efforts, you can't get friction on the walls to slow our movements either. And so we're forced into picking up 1 more note for the road before we beat the level with 4 notes, bringing our total collectibles for the game to 13. Our third stop is in China, with ribbons to not pick up. This level introduces lanterns, which are just as janky as water, but in a way I personally find much more annoying for this challenge. When close enough to the lanterns, they'll light up, and instead of jumping, you'll tie yourself with a ribbon to them. You can swing yourself around pretty freely, and jumping basically is an air jump that will detach you from the lantern. My specific personal beef, though, is that you can actually attach to the lanterns just outside the actual lit up area it shows. So during many attempts to make precise jumps near the lanterns, I attached to them and picked up collectibles. Thankfully, they aren't actually used much. You can roll under a lot of them as long as you time the roll to be underneath the collectible as it floats up. The issue though is when we get to the dragon. 5 ribbons going in, 5 more inside, 5 at the tail, and an invisible wall stopping us from going over it. I spent far more time than I'd like to admit looking for another pathway, mainly thinking about the spot from above the dragon that drops us right down before it. I even found a cool little trick involving the lanterns that I don't know if anyone's ever used or has a point in using, but I think it's kind of cool. Since jumping while attached gives you height and detaches you, by spamming jump you basically just get to the top of the lantern range and then can full jump with good momentum behind it to get really solid distance. However, my efforts and that trick were for naught, as the tunnel gives way more ribbons and puts us only right before the dragon, which is where we already were at. Most of the extra paths just give extra ribbons, not different routes to travel the level in. So we make our trek back to the dragon. Given that we can come in at any height, we jump in a way to only hit the last of the entering ribbons. Then jump twice to avoid 3 of the inner ones, bonking our head to force us to pick the other 2. There's an invisible wall here too, but it's slanted, so jumping on it just shoots us downwards. So we're forced to do just a raw jump, which didn't seem to be high enough to dodge the last 2. The ending of the level gives us a tight spot too, but we're able to jump over 2 of the final 5, putting our final score for the level at 8, and our total score at 21. Our final level in the game is in the Philippines, where we're now dodging flowers. This level is different from the previous 3, as the timer is now longer, but the level is much bigger, and actually has double the total collectibles to grab as previous levels. And it combines all the mechanics we've already struggled with: water, arrow pipes, and lanterns, all together at once. After a couple of jumps, we're immediately presented with an arrow pipe that sends us down through a large clump of flowers. And to make things worse, it leads into a circular area with more flowers in the middle that we can't dodge purely through horizontal movement. But it was in this isolated, singular moment that I learned something about the arrow tubes. If you're sent downwards in water, spamming jump actually does let you fight the current, and it greatly combats the momentum you get when you're sent out of it too. It's pretty precise, but by using this jump countering in just the right spot, you can avoid both of the flowers and the arrow tube sending you back upwards. However, that doesn't stop the required ones from being required, and we pick up a whopping 15 on the initial current, 5 on the second, and 13 on the third. Another series of tunnels forces another 10 into our bouquet, and the limited jump height due to this patch of water shoves another one into it as well. And finally, after a little bit of more uneventful traveling, we get another 2 at the very end to dodge the other 3, and with that, the level is over, at an eye-watering 46 flowers collected. So, what's the total for our Pangolin Love Minimalist run? 67. But hey, maybe it's better this way anyways. After all, from time to time, it is still important to treat yourself and others. Hey, welcome to the end of the video. Sorry about this being fairly anticlimactic. I would have loved to show off some kind of wacky glitch in the game that lets us dodge a bunch of the collectibles, but for better or worse, it's a Google Doodle game, and trust me, I searched for glitches, but I unfortunately found nothing. Challenge run videos like this are things that I've been wanting to do for a while, and I actually have some footage from a couple others that are much bigger in scale, but I wanted to start with something way easier to edit and to digest. Stuff like this is super heavily inspired by Sample and Gamechamp3000. I'd highly recommend checking out both of their works if you want to see something like this, except actually better in both intrigue and overall quality. I know I've said it in community posts and such, but I did want to give a quick shout out to you all for boosting Trader with lyrics as much as you did. 50,000 views is a massive milestone for me, and I'm so happy the efforts that I put into that video were rewarded. Much bigger projects have kind of gotten in the way of me posting stuff, but with a lot of it finally coming near a close, I can hopefully be able to show off that project, and then the floodgates will open up for me to make other things like the Holofunk song, more challenge runs, and whatever else I'd want to try out for content or for this channel. I really appreciate the support you've given me, and I hope you'll stick around to see what I make in the future. Thank you, I love you, and get out of my house.